Hi, everyone. Today I have with me Dr. Stacey Goldman, fellow naturopathic doctor and a good friend of mine, the owner of Spark Institute. Thanks for being here today, Stacey.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey to being where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. So, yes, thank you. My name is Dr. Stacey Goldman. I am a naturopathic doctor and I am the owner of the Spark Institute, which is a holistic wellness clinic located in Vaughan. And I also practice in Bradford. But yes, my journey to where I am today is it was a long journey. So, I mean, the reason I became a naturopath myself is because I had my own health issues that I was dealing with. And at the age of 17, I was actually diagnosed with something called narcolepsy. Um, so, for those of you who don't know what that is, that's an illness where, at least in the movies, they make it seem that you can fall asleep anywhere at any time. But for me, what it looked like was just being really tired all the time. And to the point where that's kind of what I was known for. So growing up, I was just known for always being tired, always wanting to have a nap, never really having energy. And that also affected my mood. And so, after going to doctor after doctor and being told, you know, everything is fine, we've looked through your blood work, there's no concerns, everything's fine. It wasn't until finally my mom, who was always such an advocate for my health, she really started advocating to do more testing, more studying. She didn't believe that it was just that I was a lazy kid, which is what it kind of seemed like. And so, because of her advocating, I ended up being referred to a sleep clinic where I was finally diagnosed with narcolepsy. And so ever since then, ever since that point in time, that's when I started becoming passionate about health and wellness. And that's also where I started to become really passionate about women's health and for advocating for other women to, trust whatever they think is happening in their body, and to help them with the education around what might be happening so that they can advocate, so they can get the right, whatever help, testing, like whatever it might be for them.
And that's the journey of a lot of us naturopathic doctors, right? Like, really being advocates for ourselves or someone in our families where we're advocates for us, and we become that voice for our patients, really advocating for our bodies, becoming more self-aware, really paying attention and trusting that our bodies are giving us signs. We're not just making it up. It's not just in our heads. So I'm really glad you were able to get to the bottom of your health concerns and move forward from there, and then utilize that to help so many other women like you do. I know you talk a lot about happiness. So can you share with us how you came to talk about happiness in the way that you do now?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, again, like all great things that has happened to me in my life, it came from my own experiences. So, growing up, I was always the queen of like happiness is right around the corner, right? So, like, as soon as I graduate university, then I'll be happy. As soon as I graduate from naturopathic college, then I'll be happy. Once I own a clinic, I'll be happy. Once I buy a house, once I'm married, like it was like there was always something else that needed to be accomplished before I was going to be happy. And one day I don't know, like I was just so happy that I decided that that was when I was going to start doing the work, like the inner work, to be able to figure out what the deal is with happiness and how I can find happiness now. And because as soon as I started practicing, one of the main questions that I always ask my patients is, how how would you rate your happiness? And more times than not, they would look at me like, what are you talking about? Like, aren't we all just kind of like whatever? Like, we're just living our life. Like, it was very rare that somebody would respond with like excitement and confidence that they were happy. And so that's when I started to explore it more and more. Um, and it made me really excited because what the research tells us is that 40 to 50% of our happiness is genetic. So there is a portion of it that gets passed on from our parents and our grandparents, but the remaining 50 to 60% is actually trainable. So we actually have an ability to like change the amount of happiness that we do feel on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, and we'll dive a little bit more into that. But first, can you share exactly what you mean by happiness? Like, what is it and what is it not?
Yeah. So, and that's a great question because where do I start? So, I mean, happiness is subjective, right? So it's based on your subjective looking at your life, and you get to decide how you want to rate your happiness. There's a number of different questionnaires that sometimes I will use with my patients if they're unsure of, how to get a baseline. But happiness is um, it's a feeling of like what's the word I'm looking for? It's like an overall satisfaction with your life, right? So like how satisfied are you with your life? But the easier way to explain happiness is by explaining what it's not. So a lot of times when people think of happiness, they think, well, it's the absence of sadness, right? Like we often think of sadness and happiness on being on like two sides of the coin, and that's just not true. Because the reality is that we can experience happiness and sadness at the same time. So, feeling a life of satisfaction and feeling happy doesn't mean that you don't get to feel sad, right? So happiness, it doesn't mean that negative things don't happen in your life or you don't have experiences that are traumatic. That's not what it means at all. Happiness is more of looking at the situations of your life in smaller pieces and taking that and looking at it overall. So, and I mean, a good example is like even with what's happening in the world right now, there might be some people who are at home thinking like, wow, I feel really happy because I get to spend more time with my family. I'm not running around driving to like activity after activity. And they can still feel sadness, right? So like sadness for what's actually happening in the world and, maybe sadness for some other people's experiences. And so you can really have those happen at the same time.
Okay, I love how you explain all of that. It sounds like it's like contentment and fulfillment and satisfaction and all of those and having perspective all at the same time. That's what happiness sounds like, and I feel like that's what it is for me too.
Yeah, and it's not a pursuit. Like we can't chase happiness. Like we're not going to, like I was explaining with my own story, like it's not once I do this then I will be happy. It's more of like a mindset, and how do we train our brain, train ourselves to feel happiness throughout the experience of life.
Awesome. Okay, and then why should we care about happiness? I know this is a slight, it's an interesting question. Like, why do we care about it? What impact does it have in our life? Like, obviously, we can all think back to our own experience, but from your experience and from the patients that you see and the people that you work with, what do you notice and in the people, like what changes when their perspective on this changes?
hmm So, I mean, from a scientific perspective, we do know that positive emotion, happiness, um, like living more in that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest, it does. The research shows it does allow for a longer life and a healthier life. They've actually found there's a reduction in cardiovascular disease and neurological diseases in those who subjectively experience more joy and happiness in their life. So, from a medical perspective, there's that. But another great kind of side effect of happiness is we've seen that as people increase their own happiness, the people around them, their happiness also changes. So, it's almost like a contagious effect, right? And I think we all know that. Like when you are in a room with someone and you just like, we all know that person, you feel like they kind of like elude this happiness, like it's almost like their energy is so positive it and allows you to feel more positive as well. So it almost like increases the overall vibration that we all get to live in.
And it's also true of the opposite. When someone exudes kind of negativity, it can kind of rub off on you. So I like that. I like being around people who are who are in that space as well, like who are happy and who have perspective and who have that sense of themselves. So, I know you have 5 key steps that can help increase our happiness, and as you mentioned, a lot of them are those mindset kind of pieces. Can you share those with us?
Yeah, of course. So I've broken it down, and to me, like, this is what's at the foundation of happiness, and this is how we can train our own brains to kind of increase that daily happiness that we want to experience. And so the number one key is practicing gratitude. And so we know that love and fear, they can't exist at the same time. So when we're in a space of gratitude, it's just this space of happiness that we get to feel. And you know, I always feel like I have to really convince people to start practicing gratitude, like people who have never done it before. And I think maybe it's because at first it might seem silly, right? Like people, especially if you're really not in a good space, like you're feeling a lot of negativity, people will say, well, I keep writing down the same thing every day, or I don't have anything to be grateful for. And what I always say is, it's actually like the smaller the thing is that you're grateful for, the bigger your overall happiness will be. And so what I mean by that is, you can be grateful that you have like food on the table and a roof over your head, and like that is something we really should be grateful for. But in a daily experience, you can also be grateful for the smile that your neighbor gave you, or like the cute puppy that you got to see, your pet. Like, it's those small things every day that we have gratitude for that actually allow us to enjoy all the like richness of life. And it's not only those big things. So I always tell people to like dig a little bit deeper. And as you start doing it for longer periods of time, the easier it becomes. And the more you actually notice those small things, like the smile. Like, it's so funny, the other day I went for a walk, and there was somebody driving like a FedEx truck, and he smiled and waved at me, and like it made me feel so happy. And I thought back, like years ago, I would have been like, I wouldn't have even acknowledged, like I would have waved and not even thought about how nice that was. So over time, you just start to experience more like happy emotions for those small little moments.
Right, and gratitude is easy to practice, and like you said, sometimes we think that we need to make, these huge overhauls in our habits to accomplish, good health or whatever it is that we want to accomplish. But oftentimes it's those little things that we might think are silly, or that might just take like 30 seconds of your time, that really have a huge impact on our life quality and on our health.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And gratitude is like, so it's one of those easy ones. And I mean, if there's some people, like there's some people who just really have a hard time with it. And a good practice is, if you find that you are having a hard time, finding 3 things every day that you're grateful for, sometimes it's easier to write a gratitude letter to somebody else that you're grateful for, right? So maybe you have a brother or a partner or a child or a mom that you're really grateful for, and sometimes just writing them that letter is easier for some people. So that's another idea.
That's nice. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I similar to you, I get a lot of patients who sometimes, depending on the state that they're coming in into, right? Like it varies from day to day. Like sometimes it's harder to be grateful for things, especially if you haven't had a bad day. But I like that strategy of writing a letter to someone else, and not really focusing so much on yourself, because when you feel like that, everything seems like not great.
Yeah. And also, like, when you write that letter and you can give it to that person, you're also increasing their happiness. So it's a nice kind of side effect.
For sure.
Yeah. So then key number 2 is movement. So I call it movement, exercise, whatever you want to call it. But we can't deny it that exercise increases happiness. When we exercise, it increases endorphins. It decreases so many chronic diseases and illnesses. I always say, like, if I could package up what exercise did for health into a pill, like, I'd be a billionaire. Just because it has so many positive impacts to us. So I try to encourage people to move their body however they want for 30 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week as a starting point. Um, and again, it's a habit, so it's going to take time to build if you're somebody who doesn't already do it.
Yeah. Yeah, my motto at clinic is 2 minutes is better than 0 minutes. So, so I'm like, do 2 minutes of stretching, do 2 minutes of going up and down stairs, do 2 minutes of squats or lunges. 2 minutes is definitely better than 0 minutes. And you can do that multiple times a day, right? Like, and it seems achievable, and then you can feel good about it. And some days, if you do more than 2 minutes, that's amazing, but at least 2 minutes is better than 0 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we get caught up in this whole like, well, you got to go to the gym and you got to shower and it takes so long and you got to change your clothes and I'm like, I don't care, wear your work clothes, go like make it as simple as possible. We always like we get in our own way. So yeah, exactly like you said. 2
Mm-hmm.
minutes.
That's all it takes.
And also like choosing a different activity. Like it doesn't have to be a CrossFit class. Like you can dance, you can like be silly in the kitchen, you can go for a walk, you can skip,
For,
whatever.
for sure. I have solo dance parties all the time. I guess it's not really a party then, is it? If it's just me, but I do solo dancing all the time. My husband walks down it out to that very often.
Yeah, and it's perfect.
Yes. So what's key number 3?
So number 3 is diet. So I always say, like, when you picture yourself as a happy and healthy woman, like, do you picture yourself getting up in the morning and going downstairs and having a bowl of like Lucky Charms and a Coke? Like, probably not, right? So that's like a very extreme example, but we do know that diet and what we put into our body, it really, really influences our mood and our happiness. And so, this is a topic that, we could go into a lot of depth about, but we know that there's the brain gut connection. So, the health of our gut is really important when it comes to our happiness. And that's because serotonin, which is our feel good hormone, most of the receptors live in the gut. So if we have a really unhealthy gut, it's going to be hard for us to feel as much happiness as we might be able to. And we also know eating things like healthy fats, like avocado and fish, like salmon, sardines. I always try to convince people to eat sardines. Um, these are things that also are going to help to increase our happiness, our feel good hormones. They're going to help to support the brain, our neurochemistry. So diet is really important as well.
For sure. And for so many things, right? Like, as you mentioned, we can talk about food like for weeks, and the impact that it has on our health. But you definitely never say anything like, oh, I feel guilty after eating that salad, or I feel bad after eating that salad. And that's the thing too. There's so much like shame and guilt and other emotions involved with food. So sometimes it's just simpler and not simpler. It can be hard to make the good choices for ourselves, but we never regret the good choices. So having someone guide you through that is really helpful, right? Like to keep us on track. And even if we do fall off the bandwagon, which we all do at some point or another, right? Like it's pretty much inevitable that we're going to make some kind of choice on the path to success. There's always failure. To also like have that mentality change, that mindset change around our connection with food, which can be really difficult. So working with a practitioner is really helpful in that sense too. Not just from what should I eat and what can improve my happiness and other aspects of my health, but also like that relationship.
Yeah, for sure. And like, don't get me wrong, like a piece of cake or a donut or, celebrating and enjoying food like that. We also know that that also increases happiness, but
Yes,
it also has to come in with, half a plate of veggies or, other foods that are also going to be positive for our overall health.
absolutely.
Yeah. And number 4, the fourth key to helping to improve your happiness is self-compassion. So, this is kind of in line with the diet piece and, feeling guilty and that sort of thing. But we, like as a society, like as humans, we are just so mean to ourselves. Like if we treated other people the way that we treated ourselves, like it would be ridiculous. So self-compassion is so important. We need to stop comparing ourselves to others, right? With social media, we are getting everyone's highlight reel, which I know we're all aware of, but we still go on there and we still compare. So the comparison and the self-compassion is a big piece of increasing our overall happiness. And I mean, the easiest way to think of self-compassion is you need to treat yourself the way you would treat your friend. right? So if you're worried about something and you think, you're beating yourself up about something, like let's say with what's going on, you have kids at home and you're trying to homeschool them, you also have to work, you're trying to manage the house, you're cooking, you're cleaning, you've been yelling at your kids a lot more, and you're starting to feel guilty and beating yourself up about it. I'm sure if your friend called you and told you the same story, she would say, like, of course you're yelling at your kids. Like, it's crazy how much you have to deal with, right? Like, that's what you would say to her. So that's what we need to start focusing on, is like, we need to treat ourselves like we would treat our best friend.
For sure. That inner voice can sometimes, not sometimes, but most of the time, be quite mean, right? Like, why
Mm.
are you doing this? Why do you keep doing this? What's wrong with you? Why can't you get over this? Like, there's so much self-talk that's negative, and self-compassion is the only way to kind of get ourselves out of that state um, like fear and anxiety and shame and guilt. Self-compassion is the opposite to that, is the antithesis to that. So self-compassion, I also, tout so much about self-compassion, and and it's constant work. It's not like, you just show yourself self-compassion one day and then you're done. It's constant work. Same thing with happiness, same thing with lifestyle habits. There will be times where it's more difficult. There will be times where you fall off the bandwagon, but it's what you're doing most of the time. Like, that's what is really important, right?
Yeah, and I mean, the thing with all of these things is they're all practices, right? It's not like you don't just master self-compassion, like you practice it. So there's going to be days where, the reaction is too quick, right? Like something happens and you react, and you just need to be compassionate, like you just need to continue to practice the self-compassion.
Hmm.
So they're all just like we're all just trying to get through life, right? Like we're all the same, we're all trying to get through it, and we're all just trying to do the best that we
Abs-
can.
Absolutely. So, what's key
So
number
the
5?
fifth key is our mindset. So our life is basically made up of the stories we tell ourselves, right? Like we give context to everything that happens because that's our life. Like that's how we come up with the story that is our life. But we have control over the stories that we tell ourselves, right? So we need to start taking more radical responsibility over the stories that we do tell ourselves. And I think we understand that we need to take responsibility over our actions, but we also need to take responsibility over our feelings, right? We can control our like we can control our own emotions, but we can't control other people's. And so, the more that we can accept that and understand that, the closer we will be to feeling this happiness. Um, because it takes out that pressure of something that we actually have no control over. So, and in practice with my patients, we talk a lot about mindset and maybe where their mindset is at. So a lot of times people will have similar ways of telling similar stories to themselves. Like they tell the same story over and over. So it might be the like I'm not good enough story, or it might be the like not accepting compliments story, right? Like somebody compliments you and you're like, oh, it was no big deal. Like you brush it off. So there's lots of different stories that we tell ourselves, and it's just becoming more aware of what stories you tell yourself. And the first step is becoming aware of it. And then the second step is deciding to choose the story, deciding to change the story that you tell yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true. We are always in pursuit of like trying to control, what we can't control. And it's not like something that we're deliberately doing, but it's because we want a certain outcome, right? So we think that we can control it. However, the only things we can control is our own thoughts and actions. We can't control what's out of our control, basically exactly what you're saying. And we do tell ourselves all these different stories. I've told myself tons of stories, and again, it's that also is a practice, right? Because there are times where those feelings of, one of the stories that I tell myself is like I'm not good enough, for example, in certain situations, and sometimes it rears its ugly head, and it's harder to kind of like change that perspective, change that mindset. And some days it's a lot easier. And for me, I link everything back to the menstrual cycle. So luteal phase, it's really hard to, get a handle on that. But follicular phase, it's usually, never mind, that's not true. And then shift the story. Shifting the story becomes a lot easier. I love
Yeah.
those 5 key steps because those are also 5 key steps to just general good health, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing that I do with my patients is or that I try to promote is like it's overall health and happiness, right? Like they go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Are there any other tips or resources that you provide to your patients, or that you would recommend to people, or that you can share with viewers regarding, everything that we've discussed today?
Yeah, so if anybody is interested, I do have a 5-day happiness challenge where we do go into more detail about each of these components of happiness. So I'm happy to share the link with you. I can give
Yeah,
you
and
the
I can post that in the description to this video.
Okay, yeah, because I don't know what it is off the top of my head. So yeah, you can join there, and there's some videos that just go into more detail about those 5 key steps.
Perfect. And so, Stacey, where do you typically hang out? How can people connect with you?
So if people want to connect, I try to hang out on Instagram. So my Instagram is Dr. Stacey Goldman, and yeah, I'd love to connect there.
All right. So again, I will post those links to Stacey's challenge and her Instagram in the description to this video. Stacey, thank you so much for being here. I loved those 5 key steps. I know everyone else will resonate with everything that you've said today, because those are things that impact all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.